You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll discuss the incredibly controversial and now mandated UFC fight kits that will make their debut at this Saturday's UFC 189 in Las Vegas. Big John and I will also take an in-depth look at the UFC's newly announced ban on IV usage for fighters following weigh-ins, which is set to begin October 1st. And John will reveal the truth about the worked fight that he was offered to take part in for the sum of $250,000. Plus, as we do on every single episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. You can submit them via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that is info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Well, this Saturday at UFC 189 in Las Vegas, the highly contentious UFC fight kits will debut as part of the promotion's exclusive apparel deal with Reebok. These MMA uniforms are, of course, mandatory for all fighters in the UFC, beginning with this card, and have quickly become the source of criticism, mockery, and even outrage. John, this really has turned into a public relations nightmare for both the UFC and for Reebok.
You can look at it two ways. I wish that everything I did in life was perfect. People want perfect, and I don't blame them. I understand you're saying, hey, if it's Reebok, you're dealing with a major corporation, they should get things right. But, it's just people, and people make mistakes. And, there's people complaining about, I guess it's Giblert.
There are a lot of errors. We'll talk about that, but the most prominent, Giblert Melendez instead of Gilbert. Giblert, available online now.
And you know what? Transpose two letters and you will live in infamy.
But if the NFL's not putting out Tom Brady jerseys, they're putting out Tom Brady jerseys.
Yeah, let's be honest. It's, like anything, when you're when you're the person in charge of the company, you're the one responsible for this in the end. And if you're going to, personally, I look at it, do I blame the UFC? I can't blame the UFC. They have a deal with a company, a major company. Reebok is as real a company as you're going to get in the clothing and shoeing category. There may not be Nike, but, they're up there. And you expect them to do things right. You give them a list of your, fighters. What more are you going to expect from the UFC? It's someone in Reebok who doesn't understand the sport. They're not looking at this like we do, where, I know it's Gilbert Melendez. I know it's not Jacare Ronaldo Souza. It's his real name is Ronaldo or Ronaldo, and his nickname is Jacare.
But according to Reebok, his real name is Jacare.
I know, my God, they called him an
alligator.
For
alligator, right? That's his real name.
But these are people that are not, they're not really, I guess, fans of the sport. They don't know it, and these are the people that are working on it, and they make a mistake not knowing. And, that's just part of life, and Reebok needs to get their act together, and they need to straighten this out, and, there's no doubt they're going to. But I don't look at it as, first off, I don't look at it in any fashion saying this is, the UFC's fault in any ways. Is it a black mark? I guess someone could say, oh, it's a black eye against them because it's not perfect, and everyone expects perfect. But it's going to be, a work in progress, and there's things that are going to happen off of it. But I personally am looking forward to seeing what, this looks like, as far as, let's see what it looks like comparative to the past of everyone putting all kinds of patches all over their shorts and everything. Let's see what these new things look like. Let's see what this, look from Reebok is going to look like now that the UFC is, enacted this. It is in part, and it's going to take place, here at 189 coming up. We're going to see what it looks like for the first time. So let's give it a chance.
Well, John, the main source of criticism from the contracted UFC fighters is a loss of income, especially the guys that are below the top tier. So say a guy, his contract, he gets paid 15 and 15, 15 to fight and 15 for a win bonus. That's a standard sort of mid-tier B minus level contractor, 20 and 20. You're fighting 3 times a year. So let's say you're on 20 and 20, you fight 3 times a year. You win your first fight, that's 40,000. You win your second fight, that's 80,000. You lose your third fight, that's $100,000 for the year, but you're paying taxes, you're paying your trainer, you're paying to your gym. So you're pocketing maybe 55 to 62,000 out of that high end. The fighters are saying where we make our money, where we can support ourselves and be full-time athletes and not have to take day jobs is from our sponsorship income. That now has all gone away in the UFC with this Reebok deal.
Well, it's gone away in the way that they were used to. It's gone away in the ways of the past. It's a change. And whenever there's change, people complain.
Absolutely.
People don't like to change. They get comfortable. Things become status quo. I know how this works, and I don't want to move on to the next iPhone. It's like, don't change things on me. And there comes a point when there's going to be change. And guys are going to have to get used to this. But, here's the point that everyone's looking at is they're saying, I'm going to lose money off of this. I can't wear my sponsor's name on my shorts going into the ring. I can't wear the T-shirt and hat and have that. And they're right. They can't. But they can have those same sponsors. But they need to do more than they did in the past. So in other words, they're going to have to work for it a little bit. They're not going to be able to just take money from someone so that they have their name plastered across their ass, while they're fighting. They're going to actually have to go to that sponsor and say, look, I like being part of your company. I want to still be sponsored by you. I want to do things for you. And they need to actually go about doing things for that company that company will sit there and say, you know what, it's worth it to us to continue to have a relationship with this athlete because this is a person who is pushing our product. This is a person who is standing behind us. This is a person that's going to certain conventions and shaking hands and signing, autographs and doing the things that are part of being sponsored by that company besides just wearing a name across your ass.
John, I think so much of this comes to historical precedent because in team sports, this doesn't exist. So Cristiano Ronaldo in soccer, we talked about Tom Brady in the NFL. They just can't go out and slap on Burger King and Diet Coke and Sony and Mitsubishi on their uniforms. That's not allowed. There's no historical precedent ever thinking they could be allowed. But the way that combat sports have evolved.
Are those athletes sponsored by people?
Absolutely. Look at Peyton Manning. He's probably 10 or 12 companies he sponsors. He just doesn't wear their patches on his Denver Broncos uniform.
And so it's exactly the same. What those athletes do is exactly what MMA fighters are now going to start to have to do. They're going to have to do something a little bit different than what they did before. It's a change. But you know what? It's not the end of the world. And you can still have those sponsors. Those sponsors are there because they want people to recognize that you are part of their company. You are someone that represents them. And so there's things that you have to do for them. Okay, do them. It is a change. It's not the same. But in the end, if you're a smart athlete, you're going to be able to keep that sponsor.
John, from the UFC's perspective, they're saying there is still sponsorship money for all of our fighters, from the champions all the way down to the guys at the bottom of the prelim food chain. But it's Reebok sponsorship money. It's not going to come from Dude Wipes or some online casino.
And that's exactly it. They are going to get money. The problem is they're not going to get the money that they expect or they want. The UFC first went after saying that they were going to do this, stepped different payments depending upon your rankings, and everyone complained. And then they switched it and said, we're going to do it off of how long you've been part of the company, how many fights you've done. There's going to be a tiered system off of that. And then everyone was, that's good, but no, it's not good because I haven't been here that long, and so I'm getting less. People are always going to complain about, one person getting more money than they're getting. And you can't make everyone happy. There's only so much money to be handed out. And they've got to make a statement, say, okay, this is the direction we're going. They did. They said, all right, we're going to go off of longevity. I think it's fair. If you're in a championship fight, you get more. So you can be a guy like a Conor McGregor, who is, hasn't been part of the UFC that long. He would be one of the, people getting the least amount, but because he's in that championship fight, he's going to get, that large amount, coming towards him. And that's as fair as you can be. You're never going to make everybody happy. When you're in this position, as far as the UFC is, this giant, machine that they are and what they're running and doing, it's impossible to make everybody happy. You're going to have people that complain. You're going to have people that are, looking at things in a way saying, I don't like this. And that's just life. And you've got to do what you think is best for the whole over best for the one.
Definitely the loudest criticism is not coming from the fighters, but from the hardcore fans. And they've been pretty brutal. And one of the big things is this is a cash grab. Right now, these jerseys as part of the UFC fight kits are $79.98 on Reebok.com. This isn't something where if you walk around in London or in Manchester, you're going to see a lot of Wayne Rooney shirts. It doesn't mean they're necessarily Manchester United fans or even soccer fans, football fans. But if you're buying a UFC shirt, maybe outside of Ronda Rousey and George St. Pierre, you're probably a big fan. So $79.98, a lot of people are saying it's exorbitant, it's outrageous. And then we talked about how Reebok doesn't seem to know the sport. Gilbert Melendez. So CM Punk, you have CM Punk. All right, he's probably going to fight under Phil Brooks. But his jersey says Phillip Brooks, no CM Punk. He's never gone by Phillip since he was in his life. And Phillip is misspelled. So they do some legendary fighters. There's no Matt Hughes, but there's Mark Hughes, which is Matt
Mark
Hughes
is pretty legendary. I mean, I did one of Mark's fights in the UFC, so I don't know what you're complaining about.
Mark Hughes, the twin brother of Matt Hughes, one fight, UFC November 2000, which you referee, John. He did win it, but he gets a shirt. Matt doesn't. Obviously, that's a mistake. This is my favorite. So I think this is Kid Yamamoto, but it says Norifumi Yakovlev. No such person exists on the planet. I don't know who that is. And my second favorite jersey just says Pickett. No first name, no quotes, just says Pickett. Maybe it's Wicked Wilson Pickett. I don't know.
Brad has decided to forego the first name, and he's just going with Pickett. That's awesome. It's kind of like Cher. Okay.
So you're a hardcore fan, and you're seeing Norifumi Yakovlev and Pickett and Gilbert Melendez. You're just shaking your head because you're saying these people are trying to take my $79.98. They have no idea what this sport is about. They have no idea who these fighters are.
Yeah, but it's not their responsibility to be the fan. This is where people get into these. The fans are complaining about the money. Okay, then don't buy the shirt.
That's a fair point.
Let's be honest. You have the ability to sit there and to complain by saying, I'm not going to buy that. Okay, that's your right. As the consumer, you have that right. But if you want to get into complaining, to sit there and say, oh, this is horrible what's going on, and my God, they're charging money. Let's take a look at the NC2A and look at all the jerseys that are sold with the NC2A and everything that happens, that the person whose name is on that jersey, that it's their number that people are buying to represent that person. They don't get one red cent.
Which is disgraceful. Disgraceful.
That's not what's happening here. The fighters are actually getting paid by Reebok. They're getting money. So if you don't like what Reebok is doing, or you don't think the price is fair, don't buy it. That's fine. But in the end, yes, it is the fighter who's going to be getting a lot of that money for you buying the specific, shirt, jersey, whatever you want to call it, for the fighter that you like.
We talk about historical precedent. It's in the book that I co-wrote with Art Davey, Is This Legal? That heading into the first UFC, Art actually considered fighter uniforms. And we write it through in the book that Art was actually thinking about what they wear in sumo. And he pitched it to his business partner, Rorion Gracie, who said, what, are you kidding me? We're not going to be wearing that sumo outfit. Are you kidding? That's a little too revealing. But then Art thought, you know what? It would just aesthetically be better. It would be cooler if these fighters, remember, there was obviously no MMA then. This is going into UFC 1, November 12, 1993. They wear what they wear in their chosen combat sport. So Art Jimerson, he wound up only wearing the one glove, but Art Jimerson, in essence, other than one glove, is dressed like he would when he boxes. Hoist Gracie is wearing his gi. Ken Shamrock is wearing what he did in strong style Japanese pro wrestling and in pancrase. Art Davie wanted that look. As the sport evolved, you started to see MMA trunks and you got rid of the pancrase boots, went to bare feet. But I do find that interesting that Art, from the very beginning, not to monetize it, but just the uniformity, pardon the pun, of these uniforms.
You know what? He was right, and he should have done uniforms.
Be a lot easier now.
Oh my God. But I can go back and it's like, people are sitting there, they can talk about it. Let's go back to the old days. How about, let's see, Harry Moskowitz comes in to fight in the UFC. Now, no one remembers Harry Moskowitz, but he's got effed up tattoo on a t-shirt with cut off sleeves that he's wearing into the octagon. And you look and you go, that just doesn't look good. Because there's always going to be someone that does something that makes you go, yep, uniforms are a good idea. It's no different than, look at school. Look at kids in school. Now, no matter what anyone wants to say, when you give people the freedom to do whatever they want, someone, not all of them, not even close to it, but someone is going to push the envelope. They're going to do something that you go, all right, you just crossed the line. And it pushes you into saying, you know what, we're going to have uniforms for our school kids now. Now, why? That way we're not separating. Everyone's dressed the same. It doesn't matter what income the parents are making. The girls don't get to wear the high, price purse with their outfit. All this stuff. It's a school regulated uniform. Well, that's what's happening here. Same as, in the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer. I don't care what. It's all uniforms. And that's because out of all the players, most of them are going to go and do things that, the little change here, little change there. It wouldn't make a difference. But there's always going to be the one dummy who goes in and puts on a pair of bikini briefs like Dennis Hallman did and makes everyone go, what in the hell are you doing? And, hey, I think uniforms are a good idea. Congratulations. Fighters always push these things to happen, and that's why they're happening.
John, you're a huge NHL fan, and you remember the outcry when the NHL started to mandate helmets. Certain players were grandfathered in.
Yeah. How about Al McGinnis? He wanted to kill everyone.
Absolutely. And now, if you're an 18 or even a 25-year-old fan of the NHL, you don't even know an era when they didn't wear helmets. You just wear helmets. And I wonder if this is the same type of thing where it's just a blip. There's an outcry now, and in a few years, it's just forgotten because, this is how the sport has evolved.
It's exactly what's going to happen.
Of course they wear uniforms. Of course they wear these fight kits.
Yeah, you look at it. You're going to see the separation. The real separation you're going to see is you have, the major promotion out there. The biggest one is the UFC. The second biggest is Bellator. So we're going to see, Bellator fighters are going to have the ability to have sponsors on their shirts, sponsors on their shorts, and all of that. The UFC fighters are not going to have that ability. They're going to have to do things a little bit different. They're going to have to be like that NFL player or that NBA player that, they can go and do a lot of things for that company and have that as a sponsor, but they're not going to be able to wear it on their uniform. And what we're going to see is which one is going to, basically ride out the other. Because the Reebok deal, it looks like it's set in stone and it looks good. It could end up in the end, they say, you know what, we're going to go back. Or they can say, this has been great and it's going to continue on. And then you're going to get bidding wars from companies like, Nike trying to come in and take that over or something, similar. And we're going to see which way it's going to go. But the outcry that people have over this issue is really silly. And, the fighters complaining about it. The fighters are complaining about it because it's change. And they look at it as change to their bottom line with how much money they're going to make. They just need to look and be smart business people and say, okay, so I got to do things a little bit different. Let me contact this sponsor. Let me show them what I'm going to do for them, and they can hold on to that sponsor.
John, final point on this. And, sometimes change starts at the top and it trickles down to the bottom. Sometimes change starts at the bottom and then organically it goes all the way to the top. Since this change is happening at the top, do you foresee a time in MMA when it's not just the other major promotions, but it's the mom and pop shows that if you're fighting in an AMI mom and pop show in a Ramada Inn ballroom somewhere in the middle of my home state of Kansas for $200, the promoter says, hey, kid, this is what you have to wear. Of course you have to wear it. If you're playing basketball, you have to wear a uniform. That it's just so ingrained. Do you see that happening, or do you think this is just going to be an anomaly with the UFC?
No, I think it's going to be. I don't think you're going to see it going down into the small promotions. I think the small promotions they're at a position where if they could make money doing it, meaning that they could get someone to actually pay for uniforms and pay them money to make the fighters wear them, they would do it because it's going to put extra dollars in their pocket. And the fighters are definitely going to be the ones that don't make anything off of it in the small type promotions in the minor leagues. But when you look at it and what's going to happen, I don't think it's going to happen overall because these small time promoters, they're trying to rub two nickels together to make a dime, and the thought of actually having to have a certain amount of shorts, and they have enough problems getting gloves, so I don't see it happening that way. But you know what? All it takes is one. And the UFC is the one. They're the one that's starting this. And we're going to see how it works. Just like I said earlier, hey, we're going to see the difference. And we're going to see if it works for them. And we're going to see if other ones look at it in the end and say, you know what? That's the way to go. That's the way we want to see things. And, to have control over what you're putting on TV representing your product is always a smart thing.
Every week on Let's Get It On, we bring you our poll question. You can cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. So here we go with this week's poll question. Are you in favor of the new UFC fight kits? Just like that. Very simple. Vote yes or no. Let your voice be heard. Let us know what you think. Letsgetitonpodcast.com. John, before we go to our listener questions, what would be your vote? Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I get that sense from you.
And the whole reason why is, look at fighters have done things that have made the sport look bad. Okay. And when I'm not too much into worrying about, the UFC or Bellator or anything like that. They're big boys. They can handle themselves. But when you're starting to make the sport look bad because all of a sudden you had, my friends, made me a bet and I lost the bet and I have to wear this. Common sense. You know what? Lose the bet. Go go do something that doesn't make the sport of MMA look bad. And, we get enough guys that do stuff. It pushes a company into, hey, I need to have control of this. And I don't see a problem with it now.
We are set now for your questions. We do it every week. You can ask us whatever you'd like. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, email your question, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. And of course, as I implore all of you every week, especially our international listeners, forget that. Anybody, please send me a pronunciation guide. First up, someone coming right from my native Kansas, Kevin Ware. Easy name to pronounce. I like that very much, John. So this is intriguing, and I'm going to weigh in after you answer his question because I have a similar take on this. So Kevin asked, John, something that has stuck with me for half a decade. In 2010, on the Adam Carolla podcast, you said that before the fight, as the fighters were entering the cage and lining up, 75% of the time you would know who would win the fight based on the mannerisms and behaviors of the fighters. John, can you elaborate further on this and let us know if you still have this ability?
It's an ability. I'm like a mentalist. Oh my God! You know what? First off, I want to apologize that I have affected 5 years of your life with you having to think about this. Yes, look at what you're not seeing, and what I get to see is I get to see the fighters in the back before that fight ever occurs. Fighters are going to do all kinds of things, and they're going to, they're going to build the fight. They're going to try to show you that, I'm going to tear this guy apart. He's not in my class. They're going to say all these things. And it finally gets to the week of the fight where they know it's close and the nerves start and the pressures of, having to perform. And when I, say fear, all fighters have fear. Now, they don't have fear of the man or woman standing across the cage from them, but they have the fear that that man or woman can make them look bad. And those things start to compound, and they start to, take a toll. And so when I go in the back and I get to converse with the fighter, I see what their mannerisms are like. I see how relaxed they are. I see how tight they are. I see what they're having when they ask questions, what the questions are. What are they nervous about? What are they concerned with that this person does that they have a concern? How, when they're sitting there, how long if he takes me down, how long are you going to let him be on top of me? All of those things are indicators of I've got a person, I have a fighter here who has concerns over things that are going to happen in the fight when really all they have to do is go out and fight. And so, yes, you do get indicators from the fighters. And those are things that, this is why, they don't allow officials to gamble. I can't go and bet on fights. It's not, it's not permitted, for me to have my license. I can't do that. And it's, you never should. There's all kinds of reasons that they try to keep gambling and everything as far as the regulatory side of the sport completely separated. And that's why when, as a referee, I don't get assignments until that night of the show. Usually I don't know who I am officiating because no one can come to you and say anything about, well, what do you know or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know who I'm doing. So, anyone asks me ever, hey, what do you think about this fight? I tell them it's going to be a fantastic fight. Should be a great fight. I never sit there and say, oh, I think so-and-so is going to win. Okay. That is not my job and that's not my purpose. And that's for the fan to figure out who they think is going to win. But you will get information from fighters that gives you an idea of, oh, this person's in trouble. This person's got some real concerns, and they're not thinking about winning. They're thinking about not looking bad. They're thinking about, how do I get out of this? How do I survive? And that's not the attitude that, a winner goes into the fight with. And Sean, you're the one, you get to talk to the fighters as an interviewer. And how many fights going in do you say, oh, I know who's going to win this fight based upon your interviews?
I would say, having done well over 2,000 fighter interviews, some are multiple guys, but every fight, starting when I was in M1, actually starting when I was doing regional shows on local cable in Kansas City 12, 14 years ago, I sit down and I still hold it to this day in Bellator, whether it's our main event or world title fight, or whether it's the first prelim, the very few people are going to watch online on spike.com. I sit down 20 to 25 minutes. And I would say with about 85% accuracy, based on those fighter interviews, I know who's going to win. Now, like you, John, is a play-by-play commentator, I feel it's my job to be totally neutral. If I start to think or say publicly, which I never would, or even privately, who's going to win, I think subconsciously that's going to affect my call. And if I'm anything less than neutral, I think that I'm dead as a commentator. Yeah. So I never want to put that out, play that out. But in my mind, after I've talked to both fighters, about 85% of the time I'm spot on who actually wins.
Yeah, and look, there are those times when you go and both guys, both girls, they're perfect. I mean, you go and you say, hey, man, this is a toss-up fight. You're not going to have an idea who's going to win it. And there are those times when, you look and you say, man, this person's in trouble. And they go out there and they perform beautifully and they win the fight. And you can be wrong with it. But you get an idea, especially, you got to figure out how many fighters have I talked to before the fights. You figure every fighter that I am working with, I meet face to face with before the fight. I talk to them. I ask them questions. I have them ask me questions. So we're talking thousands and thousands of fighters that I have talked to. And yeah, you're going to get ideas of who's ready for this and who is in a position like, I'm just not really wanting to be where I'm at. And you're going to see it. And it kind of tells you who's going to be the person coming out on top in the fight.
John, Jimmy Smith and I have joked about this since we started together in M1 8 years ago. There are certain key phrases, buzzwords that we hear, and we know the guy is dead. For instance, you'll hear, shockingly, this isn't really about winning or losing for me. Or I don't care about winning. I just want an exciting fight. Or I'm just thrilled to be in this fight. 100% of the time, those fighters lose. And Jimmy Smith, who was a 6-1 pro MMA fighter, says this is the psychology of already building excuses. Well, exactly. I lost because it wasn't that important to me. or I lost because I wanted to please the crowd. They're already building excuses. They're already essentially done mentally before they even engage physically.
Absolutely. And this is, over time, you get to, you get to understand human nature. You get to understand the psychology of a fighter. And, this is all stuff that we look to because it helps us, for me as a referee, any referee, that's the person that I'm going to be standing on a certain side of because I'm watching them a little bit more because I'm actually seeing how they are performing in the fight, how they're interacting with their opponent, and are they starting to give up on the fight? And sometimes you'll see that. And, this is all information we use.
Our next question comes from Susan Walker, a great fan of our podcast from episode 1. Susan asked, John, can you explain why Floyd Mayweather was just stripped of his WBO title? In the UFC, you are allowed to hold belts in different weight classes at the same time.
Well, there's a huge difference between boxing and MMA when it comes to belts. I think we've talked about this before on the program, but belts when it comes to MMA are promotional belts. There is the UFC belt. The UFC is a promotion. There is the Bellator World Championship belt. That is a promotion. There is the RFA. There is the M1. There's all these different promotional world titles. Most people are looking at either the UFC or Bellator to be the one that is the real world title, with more people leaning towards the UFC. Let's be honest about it. But boxing is set up on a completely different system. Promoters have no control. Well, at least they're not supposed to have any control over the world titles in boxing. Those are run by sanctioning bodies. Sanctioning bodies like the WBC, the WBA, the WBO, the IBF, the NABF. All of these are different sanctioning bodies. And what happens with those sanctioning bodies when it comes to someone like a Floyd Mayweather, all sanctioning bodies in their bylaws say that a fighter can only hold one title, meaning in that weight class. So he can't be someone that fights like Floyd Mayweather, where he'll fight at welterweight, 147 pounds, and he has gone up to 154 pounds, which would be a super welterweight, and he can't hold titles in those two separate weight classes according to the sanctioning bodies and their bylaws, but they all break those bylaws and they allow it to happen many times. But the real reason of what occurred with the WBO and Floyd Mayweather is Floyd, being the championship fighter, being the person that has the title, is required to pay a fee to that sanctioning body. And that fee, depending upon how much the fight is worth, varies. So the WBO requested that Floyd Mayweather pay them $200,000 for the sanctioning rights of that WBO title. And Floyd Mayweather basically said, screw you, I ain't paying you anything. And they say, well, we're going to strip him because he has fought in multiple weight classes and he needs to pick which one, and he's not paying our sanctioning fee, and so we're going to strip him. So they strip him of the title, and they then make the Jesse Vargas versus Timothy Bradley fight a interim belt first, and then a full belt. Once they stripped Mayweather, they gave it to Bradley. So what are they doing? They're making themselves look stupid. They're making themselves look like what they are. People that just take money for nothing, for doing nothing. You know what? I'm glad Floyd Mayweather didn't pay him. And I'm not saying that $200,000 to Floyd Mayweather is a drop in the bucket. But, the fees associated with some of these things that they're putting on him and what the fighters are paying are astronomically stupid, because that organization isn't doing enough for that fighter to represent why that fighter's paying that much money. And it's the travesty. If you're the champion of the UFC, you know how much money you pay the UFC for that belt? Zero. If you're the champion of Bellator, do you know how much money you're paying Bellator for that belt? Zero. You get that belt. In fact, every time that you fight for it, they give you another belt. They treat that person pretty well. And that's the way it's supposed to be. The champion is not supposed to have to pay a sanctioning body $200,000 to say, I'm your champion.
We do indeed separate fact from fiction on our program. Keep your excellent emails coming with your questions. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. You know what? You don't need the WBO. The WBO might need Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Big John McCarthy, but neither of you need the World Boxing Organization.
Unbelievable.
Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, John and I will discuss the UFC's controversial ban on IV usage for fighters following weigh-ins, which is set to begin October 1st. And John will tell the story of his $250,000 offer to take part in a worked MMA fight in Pride. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock, and you are listening to Let's Get It On. It's the book that Wrestling Observer calls a must-read for any MMA fan. Jonathan Snowden of Bleacher Report describes as riveting and amazing, and TheFightNerd.com says nothing is held back. Pick this book up right away. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, written by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by John McCarthy, is now available to listeners of this podcast at the special price of $12.48. That's far less than you'll pay for the book on Amazon and half price of what you'll pay in store at Barnes & Noble. Buy it directly from the publisher now online at ascendbooks.com and enter the promo code LEGAL50. That's ASCEND books.com, promo code LEGAL50. Learn the true story of how the UFC came into existence in the book that Randy Couture describes as honest, shocking, and enthralling, and that has a rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars from Amazon Reader Reviews. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by Big John McCarthy. Available now online at ascendbooks.com for just $12.48 when you use the promo code LEGAL50. Hey, this is Sean Wheelock.
And this is Big John McCarthy.
If you're a fan of our show, then you're going to love the rest of the Ignotainment podcast lineup.
Like the Ocho Man behind the 8 Ball and the Whiskey Philosopher with Jeff Cooper.
You can find these great podcasts and more at ignotainment.com. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of the program.
Let's get it on!
When looking for new and exciting clothing concepts, look no further than Lambs to Lions. Lambs to Lions has great designs that incorporates the past from boxing with the new and exciting evolution of MMA. We all start out as lambs, but with time, training, and hard work, we can all become lions. Be part of the Lambs to Lions movement and check out all of their great designs. You can get your Lambs to Lions gear at the Las Vegas Fight Shop or go to lambstolionsbrand.com.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
2 weeks ago here on Let's Get It On, John and I spoke extensively about worked fights in MMA in the aftermath of the Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock bout. While we did our absolute best to present the facts and the numerous conspiracy theories that Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock had a predetermined outcome, our conversation definitely opened up a wider discussion on shoots and works and led you, John, to telling me off air about the time that you were approached to participate in a worked fight in Pride. I love this story, man.
Oh, man, you know what? It's so stupid that, it all back, when it was happening, it was I'm mumbling here because it just I get frustrated with. I hate the fact that there's worked fights, that have been worked. But there's a difference between the Japanese MMA scene and what is in North America. There's just a difference. What's in Brazil? Certain countries do not accept fake fights, and certain countries, they're all about them because they like to build storylines. It's more about like a pro wrestling, and they do things. And Pride had quite a few fake fights. Now, that doesn't mean that, all of their fights were fake. They had some incredible shows, some incredible fights, in Pride. But, there was some fake fights there. And at one point in my life, I was contacted about working for Pride as a referee, and then I was contacted about doing a fight. And over, the time, my wife, she was the one really doing the negotiations for me. And, she said, how much would you want? I said, well, I'd have to make enough money. If I go and I fight for them, then I'm out of refereeing, here for good. The UFC will never have me back. So I'd have to make enough money. So she put a big number out there, and they said, okay.
$250,000.
$250,000, which that was a hell of a payday. And man, I should have done it. I would have had $250,000, and that would have lasted me at least a week. I'd have bought some really fancy stuff. But the whole thing came apart when they said who my opponent would be, and I said, absolutely, do it. I'll do it right now. And then it came down to, we would need you to carry this person. I said, what do you mean carry him? What do you? I'm not going to sit there and do it. And then it was, in the end, he needs to be the winner. And basically, it was a matter of, look, I've grown up and been, part of enough things and learned enough in my life to know you come into this world and you're given a name. And with that name comes responsibility. And you nurture, that name. If you're a smart person, you realize it's really it's the first thing you get when you come in, and it's the last thing that you're going to leave. And, you try to build that name, and you try to do what's right with it. And over time, you reach certain levels, and, that name becomes associated with other names that help build it, and to take and to do something that is wrong, and to just allow someone to beat you when maybe they can't, and you're just going to allow it to happen so people think it's real, then you're sullying your own name. And I wasn't going to do that, and it wasn't worth any amount of money to me. And so I turned it down. And it was the smartest decision because, like I said, a week later, I'd have been out $250,000 and had been gone, and I'd have been pissed at myself for the rest of my life that I threw a fight that I possibly could have won. I'm not saying that I could have, but we'll say that I possibly could have won it. But knowing that I threw it, couldn't live with myself. So that was the end. That was the end of the discussions. I told him, no, I won't do that. And it kind of broke off from there pretty quick.
John, you're a really humble guy, but this truly speaks to your character. I mean, let's put this in perspective. At the time, you have 3 young kids. You're an officer for the Los Angeles Police Department. So I'm saying you're not making anywhere near $250,000. And because this is a work, you don't have to train. You just show up. Because it's Japanese MMA, it's Pride. There are no weight classes, so you don't have to cut weight. So literally, you have to fly to Japan, you have to lose, and go home for $250,000. And because of your strength of character, you said not a chance.
Yeah, well, everybody's different, and everyone's got to figure out in life what's important to them. And, the one thing that I've learned over time is, man, I don't care how much money you make. It's not the most important thing. And, I've learned that, time is the most important thing. And it's something that money can never buy. That time that you spend with your kids, that time that you can spend with the people that make differences in your life for the better. Those are the things that are priceless. And money is great. And I tell people all the time, I will never be rich. And I'm never going to be. People think I'm rich. It's hysterical. But, I live a modest life. And, I'm able to pay my bills. That's the most important thing, is that I make enough to pay my bills. But who you are and what you represent is that's what's important, that you represent a truth. And I'm all about speaking the truth to people. I tell people all the time, look, I only lie about a couple of things. I lie about money to my wife, okay? Because, I just don't have a lot. I'll sit there. But normally I do it in an odd way. I'll sit there and say, I really want this thing, and it's $250. And she'll go, $250? And I said, yeah, but it's going to be cool. And the thing's really like $80. And I said, but I can get it for $80. And she'll go, you get it for $80? And she's like that. She's got such a deal. And so I'll be able to get it. And so that's the way I lie about money. I'll lie about, I hate to say this, but I'll lie about, haircuts, women. What do you think of my hair? I just had a cut. It's beautiful. You look fantastic. Okay. Other than that, I don't lie. So, I'm not going to sit there and lie about, the fact that this person beat me if they can't beat me. And, if he can beat me, God bless him, all the power to him. He proved it. He deserves it. but I am never going to give that to somebody. The money is never going to be worth it to me.
You and I both know a pretty famous old school American fighter who willingly participated in a full-on work in Japan. Not a fix. A fix is when one guy is in on it. A work is when both guys are in on it. He lost, and it haunts him. It's like the ghost of Christmas past. It continues to haunt him. And we separate fact from fiction. We say it like it is. For legal reasons, I don't want to say his name, and it's really not our place to say his name. Most people would know who he is. The stories are out there on the internet. But we know from firsthand experience in dealing with this fighter, and he's a retired fighter now, he can't shake it. Whatever he was paid, that money's gone, but this still haunts him.
Exactly. You know, there was, when I sit there and I say that thing about your name, it means so much to me. And, you know, the person that you're talking about, I know who you're talking about, and he has a great name. He has a name that he helped build and, you know, develop by becoming an incredible athlete, and everything that he did, he was a winner in. And then he goes and he does one thing because he looks at it and says, financially, I need it. They're gonna give me other fights. Financially, it's gonna work out for me. So what if I lose this one fight? It doesn't matter. And he has to think about that stupid fight for the rest of his life because he knows that he allowed someone to beat him that never would have beat him in a real shoot, you know, being a real fight. And he's got to live with that. And that's, you know, like I said, sometimes there's things that's just not worth it. Money's not worth it. And that pride of who you are and what you represent, the money's not worth it to do it.
Extremely well said, John. Well, this past Monday on Twitter, BJ Penn wrote, quote, I love the new PED and IV ban in the UFC. I never took an IV in my life after a weigh-in. IVs are for wimps, end quote. This is, of course, BJ Penn's reaction to the UFC's newly announced ban on IV usage for fighters following weigh-ins. It's put forth as part of the overall policies of the U.S. anti-doping agency. It's set to begin on October 1st. Now, John, banning PEDs and recreational drugs is one thing. Banning IVs in MMA, it's a bit of a slippery slope.
This is a really slippery slope, and this is where it's the slippery slope is there's the question of safety and health of the fighters, and you know, right now the way USADA looks at things and the way they do them is they look at a IV, you know, being used by the athlete as a way of trying to mask a substance that they have taken or trying to dilute the substance that they've taken in their body so that when they do a P test, it's going to come out in a diluted fashion so it would pass the inspection instead of failing that test. And I can understand the way they're looking at it that way. It makes sense. But USADA is looking at all athletes. They're looking at athletes that do not cut weight for their sports. They're looking at track and field athletes. They're looking at shot putters, sprinters, long distance runners. They're looking at all of those types of athletes. They're looking at swimmers. They're looking at bicyclists. They're looking at all the different types of athletes there are in the Olympic movement. Now, fighting is part of the Olympic movement. When we talk about boxing, we talk about taekwondo, we talk about judo, we talk about wrestling. They're not all fighting, but they're all combative sports in some fashion. And in those, we do have some elements of weight cutting. But fighting is the one that we have the elements of weight cutting in MMA with the element of strikes landing on the head. And this is now where you get into that slippery slope of, well, what's best for the athlete? Many athletes in our sport are cutting weight. In fact, most athletes in our sports are cutting weight.
Severe.
And go ahead.
Weight, John, obviously. Severe
Absolutely.
weight. No, severe weight.
Some of them crazy weight cuts, you know, and with that, that's become a norm for our athletes, and they get used to doing something a certain way, and then they become, you know, a good fighter in that weight class. They become a champion in that weight class, and now you're going to try to change what they do, what has become their norm in dehydrating their body, which I'm never going to say is good. It's bad for the athlete. It's bad for everything that they're doing at that moment, and it's bad for later on in their life. I don't like it. I don't want to see it happen, but I know it's happening. They do it, and then they try to rehydrate. Well, they're not just rehydrating by drinking, fluids into their system. They're going and getting an IV. The same as if you were out on a long run or a long walk and became dehydrated and they took you to the hospital. They're not going to take a bottle of water and shove it in your hand and say, drink. They're going to take and they're going to put an IV into your arm to put a saline solution into your system to help rehydrate you more effectively. That's what the hospital is going to do, because it's the best way of getting fluid into you, and that's what the fighters are doing to rehydrate from their weight cut. So this is something that it really needs to be looked at by USADA, because USADA is what the UFC is using for all of their drug testing. So any UFC athlete is going to be affected by this. Now, you can be any other, MMA fighter, boxer, anything, and you're fine. You don't have to worry about this. If you're fighting in Bellator, you don't have to worry about the IV situation. You can continue doing what you're doing. But if you're a fighter in the UFC, this is now going to become a concern, because you've got to start doing weight cuts where you are not starting to rehydrate yourself through the use of an IV. And that's going to put a big damper on a lot of people's ability to do what they've been doing.
The extreme weight cuts we're talking about, a world-class, forget which fighting promotion, a world-class lightweight 155-pounder is walking, he's training when he's not fighting in cutting weight, his normal everyday weight in training in the gym. If he's a world-class elite 155er, is going to be somewhere between 185 and 190 pounds. Now, Jimmy Smith and I will do our Bellator fighter interviews 2 days before the fights, 1 day before the weigh-ins. Routinely, we will have guys say, oh, I've got 12 to go. I've got 14. I've heard I've got 22 pounds to go. So these are guys that might have to lose over 20 pounds, and routinely they're losing over 10 pounds in maybe a 28 to 30 hour window. My wife, Kelly John, asked me all the time, how do they do it? And I say, it's an artificial weight loss. I said, take a sponge and just keep wringing out every single drop of water from that sponge until it's dry. That's an artificial weight cut. As soon as they eat, they drink, they have the IV, their weight shoots up. It's not a real weight cut. And Jimmy Smith talked about it when he was a guest on this program. That's the biggest change in MMA from even a decade ago. We just didn't see guys cutting 30, 40 pounds. Now we see it all the time.
Absolutely. And you're exactly right. When you're talking, what people don't understand is when a fighter is, we'll say that they're that lightweight 155-pound fighter. When they're in the gym in a normal situation, training, and we'll say just getting ready, they just signed for a fight, and their fight's going to be, 2 months down the road. They're at that 185, 190 pounds. And as they're working out and they're training and getting themselves ready, they're going to lose a little bit coming into about, the 178, 177 pound range. And then at about 2 weeks before that fight, they really start dieting. They start dieting down on what they're putting in their body. They're usually trying to put good foods as they're training, but they're really going to cut actually the calorie intake, and they're going to drop a lot of that weight, getting down from, we'll say, that 178 into that 168, 167, 166 pound range. And then they're going to get to that point where they're at the fight. And what they're going to do is they're going to go and they're going to put on sweats. They're going to go into saunas. They're going to start working out hard, and they're not going to rehydrate. When they get thirsty, they just think about something else. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. It sucks to do. I can tell you, it makes you feel bad. You're a miserable person, but they've learned how to do it. They're going to put hot towels on. They're going to put sweet sweat on. They're going to lay down and just let their body run as a hot furnace without putting any liquid back in to help with the hydration of it. And so their body just keeps on losing weight due to the water loss and nothing coming back in. And finally, they're going to get to that point where they make that 155-pound weight limit. And as soon as they step on that scale, you see them right away. They're starting to hydrate right back. They're putting the fluids back in, but it's hard on your body to do.
Travis View, the light heavyweight, prolific light heavyweight, great career up and down MMA, numerous promotions, big and small. When he fought first in Bellator at light heavyweight at 205, he told me that he would start his weight cut at about 270 pounds. I said, what do you think you are in the cage after rehydration? So this is probably about 29 to 30 hours after weigh-ins typically. Said probably about 235. So you think about that. You started 270, you hit 205.8 or 205.9, and now the next day plus a couple of hours you're in the cage and you're at like 235. That's crazy on your body. And fighters who don't do severe weight cuts, BJ Penn was not a big welterweight. He wasn't even a big lightweight against IVs because they know that IVs lend to the process of your opponent, even though he made weight, maybe outweighing you by 20 plus pounds in the cage during fight.
Yeah, exactly. Well, BJ didn't like to lose any weight. That's why BJ liked fighting. Look at BJ was, naturally a 168-pound guy. He didn't like to cut to 155, and then he made the one cut to 145, and people were like, I don't know if BJ can do that because that's just not the norm for what he was used to. But BJ was a 170-pound guy fighting, he fought Lyoto Machida, who was 200 and some pounds. He never thought about fighting bigger guys as a problem. He liked fighting the bigger guys. But, BJ talking about, well, you're a wimp if you, take an IV. No, you're not a wimp if you take an IV. It's called being a smart person to rehydrate your body. If it's something that you didn't do and you can sit there and say, well, I never did it, so anyone who does it is a wimp. Okay, you can say it. It doesn't make it so. But, all fighters are different. You're going to get, there's hardly any heavyweights in the UFC right now. They're going to worry so much about this problem because they're within a weight that they don't have to worry about rehydrating in that fashion. They don't lose a lot of weight, but all of your lighter weight fighters are losing a ton of weight. And this is going to be a problem for them. This is going to be something that, they're going to have to figure out. Either the UFC is going to have to talk to USADA and they're going to have to change, their basic, regulations and policy when it comes towards mixed martial arts and allow that, or they're going to, toe the hard line and the fighters are going to have to figure out how to do this in a different way.
John, what I really think is coming, and I think it will start with one progressive athletic commission in the US or Canada, then I think it will sweep through North America, sweep through the ABC, and then sweep through the sport. There's going to be day of weigh-ins. And my guess is, and I'm speculating now, I think it's going to be, say you fight at 145. All right, you weigh in so you can get up to 146.0. Then within a certain period, the day of your fight, maybe within 2 or 3 hours, you'll get back on the scale. And per your weight class, you will only be able to regain X percentage. I really firmly believe that's coming down the road.
I think partially you're right. I think you're wrong when it comes to same-day weigh-ins. I don't think you're going to see same-day weigh-ins because there's a lot of commissions. Let's be honest. Why? I'm going to ask you a question here, Sean. Why did weigh-ins used to be day of for boxing? It was day of weigh-ins, and then it changed. Why did it change?
I don't know the answer. I'm going to speculate and say probably publicity because you make it a spectacle with the media and the fans. That's purely a guess. Okay.
And you can look at that, but the real reason is a guy named Duke Cool Kim.
Oh, from the Ray Mancini fight.
Ray Boom Boom Mancini fights Kim. Those were same day weigh-ins. And Duke Cool Kim lost 23 pounds of weight to get to that weight and then had the day of fight and then dies of brain damage, subdural hematomas based upon dehydration being a big part of it, fighting outside at Caesar's Palace. That's why weigh-ins were changed to day before. And so you can sit there and say, well, we're going to get same-day weigh-ins. Nah, you're not going to solve the problem with making it same day. Guys are still going to do the things that they're going to do. What we do have to do is we have to set a limit on how much guys can lose. We need to start doing things like hydrostatic tests where the fighter is tested for his body fat and the amount of water in his system, that there is a calculation that they can do to say this fighter weighs at this time 176 pounds. To get down to 155 pounds, he's losing too much weight percentage-wise. So we're going to say that the least that this fighter can ever weigh is 164 pounds. Well, that right there just said that the fighter's in a different weight class than 155. He's going to have to go to the 170. So that fighter can now fight at 170 because that hydrostat test says he can go down to 164. Well, he's not going to go to 164 if the weight class is 170. And he's going to have to do that every year. He's going to have to get retested. So every year, it could change for him. But it's also going to be where not only are you going to have that test, then you're going to have where the fighters are only going to be allowed to gain so much weight after the weigh-in. There is going to be a percentage associated with that. And that percentage being 6%, 7%, whatever they're going to come up with is going to be the, factor of, does this person fit within the weight qualifications for what we set as a precedence of this is the least that they can weigh, and after they weigh in, this is the most they can weigh in after that. But the real problem with all of this is it's easy to say and do, but there's always going to be people against it, and those people are going to be your promoters, because your promoters are going to be afraid of losing fights.
Which they will.
Absolutely. And they're trying to put a card together, which is hard unto itself, and then to bring in these other regulations where you can actually have the fighters there. You can pay for the fighters to be there along with their people. The fighter can actually make weight, and then as they step on the scale before the fight, you're going to have a commission say, nope, he's 2 pounds over what he's supposed to be. He can't fight, and we lose a fight. That's going to create a problem. And this is the type of situation that needs to be overcome for this to work the right way.
I think these extreme weight cuts, fans are starting to get hip to it, but I still think the casual MMA fan is unaware, not just of how big these fighters are walking around, but actually what their in-cage or in-ring weight is. We've never seen that historically in boxing. I know there were stories of Mike Tyson getting really fat, Ricky Hatton getting really fat, but by and large, take Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. They're not cutting 30 or 40 pounds. What do you think Floyd Mayweather Jr. walks at? Probably high 150s when he fights at 147? He's not ballooning up into the 180s.
Yeah, I would say Floyd doesn't ever weigh over 155 pounds. So, his whole weight cut is going to be somewhere, let's be honest, 6, 7 pounds, 8 pounds. That's it. He's never going to have that hard weight cut. One of the things that makes Floyd Mayweather who he is the guy is always in shape. He is a, physical beast as far as what he can do and how he, trains himself. So his weight's not going to fluctuate that much.
But John, even with his tools, if you take Floyd Mayweather Jr. and you bring his skill set hypothetically to MMA, no one is going to let him fight at 145. They're going to push him to 35, or if it was viable, fight at 125. That's just the culture of it. We're not seeing the Fedor Emelianenkos anymore. If Fedor Emelianenko were American and 20 years old, he would be fighting at 185 instead of knocking out heavyweights.
Hey, that's true. This is what we talked about in the last show. And we're talking about, guys dropping down, so far. UFC 189's got, Brandon Thatch at 170 pounds. That's a big dude at 170 pounds. Bellator is going to have Diego Lima fighting coming up. That's a big dude at 170 pounds. You look at some of these guys, and this is what Jimmy Smith was talking about. Some of these guys are huge when they step in that cage compared to what the supposed weight class that they're fighting in. When Tito Ortiz used to fight Forrest Griffin, those are two guys that really had it down. Forrest Griffin made that 205-pound weight limit. Tito Ortiz makes that 205-pound weight limit. But when they step in that cage, they're 230 pounds. They're heavyweights, and they're in the middle of the heavyweight classification when they're actually fighting. When you watch Tito Ortiz fight Alexander Shlemenko, look at the difference of the size of those two guys the night of that fight.
I think I said on the broadcast it looked like they were about 3 weight classes apart.
They are 3 weight classes apart. Shlemenko is probably, he may be tipping in at 188, 190 pounds because he's not a big 185-pound fighter, and Ortiz is weighed in. Yeah, he made, a 205-pound weight limit, which is what the fight was at, but now he's up at that 230. So you're looking at a 180, 190-pound guy going against a 230-pound, 40-pound weight. That's a big difference in weight class. You're looking, depending upon where you're at, that's a couple of weight classes.
John, final thing on this. Do you think that there's going to be enough pressure from fighters, from trainers, from managers to to go to the UFC, who will then in turn go to USADA and say, you know what, we have to reevaluate this IV policy? It's ingrained now with a lot of fighters that they're using IVs. And while The USADA could see it as masking. This might come down to fighter health and safety because we don't just want them chugging bottles of water.
Well, that's normally I'm going to sit here and say, hey, you got to change. But the real question is, the health and safety of the fighter is number one. And is this more about worrying about them masking something, or is this about trying to at least get them hydrated in a way that is not going to negatively affect them the night of the fight and negatively affect them later on in life? And I can't say for sure that it's not going to affect them, later on in life. Anybody, you sit there and you dehydrate yourself. I used to do it all the time for wrestling and things. And look at, you do it, and later on in life, you got a lot of kidney stones. Have a kidney stone. See what it's like. Well, why is that happening? It's because you did it to yourself by drying yourself out and then hydrating, then drying yourself out and hydrating, and drying yourself out. These are the little things that sometimes later on in life affect you. And, kidney, damage, kidney disease, these are all things that can happen through, dehydrating yourself and doing those massive weight cuts. But we don't think about it now when we're young. We don't think about it as, part of my professional life. But when your professional life is over and you have to live the rest of your life, you're going to end up dealing with all of these things that you did to your body. It's no different than driving a car. You can drive a car and drive the wheels off of it by, just putting miles on it. Or you can drive the wheels off it by the way that you drive it, how hard you drive it. You don't have a lot of miles on it, but it's got a lot of damage to it. And so that's what happens when fighters are doing the things that they're doing.
We are back with you next week for an all-new episode of Let's Get It On, first available on Friday. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/letsgetitonpodcast, and on Twitter @PodcastMMA for this show, and for us personally, @John McCarthy MMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that is info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. We're very pleased to say that every single episode we gain more listeners in the U.S., Canada, and abroad. Please help us spread the word, as this is your podcast as much as it is ours. For John McCarthy, our producer Chris Lakin, Everett Hicks, who's in producing this week for Chris and our entire crew, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.